My parents made it clear at Christmas that only my sister's family made them proud and handed them expensive gifts while giving us almost nothing, so I went no contact. Then they showed up, asking why we were pulling away. I've always been the family disappointment. Not in the dramatic way. I never got arrested or developed a drug habit. My crime was far worse in my parents' eyes. I was ordinary. I became a high school science teacher instead of pursuing the prestigious medical career they had mapped out for me. My sister Elaine, on the other hand, had followed the script perfectly. She married a successful investment banker, had 2 photogenic children, and leveraged her law degree into a partnership at a prestigious firm. Their Christmas cards looked like they were ripped from a Williams-Sonoma catalog. Our parents, Richard and Margaret Mercer, made no secret of their preferences. Mom was a retired hospital administrator, and Dad was a cardiothoracic surgeon. Excellence wasn't requested in our family, it was expected. I'd long ago accepted my place in the family hierarchy, seeing my parents and sister at obligatory holidays and occasional family events. I'd come to peace with it. My wife Sophia and our son Ethan were my real family now. Sophia was a nurse at the local children's hospital, and we lived a comfortable, if modest life in a small suburban development about 40 minutes from my parents' sprawling estate. That was until last Christmas when everything changed. The invitation to Christmas Day at my parents' house had been a surprise. Usually we rotated holidays, with Christmas being spent at either Sophia's parents' place or our own small house. But this year Mom had called personally. "Daniel, we'd like you all to come for Christmas this year," she'd said, her voice carrying that familiar note of authority that broke no argument. "Ela and the family will be there, and your father and I think it's important we're all together." I detected something odd in her tone, an unusual eagerness perhaps, but I dismissed it. Maybe they were getting sentimental in their early 70s. "Sure, Mom," I'd replied. "I'll check with Sophia, but it should be fine." Sophia had been hesitant when I told her. My parents had never been particularly warm to her, viewing her career choice as somehow lesser than Elaine's, despite the fact that Sophia worked harder than anyone I knew. "Are you sure?" she'd asked, her dark eyes concerned. "Christmas with your parents hasn't exactly been joyful in the past." "It'll be fine," I'd assured her, squeezing her hand. "Ethan will get to spend time with his cousins, and maybe they're finally mellowing out." Ethan had been excited. At 8 years old, he idolized his older cousins Madison and Trevor, who were 12 and 14 respectively. They largely ignored him, but he still looked forward to any chance to be around them. "Will Grandma and Grandpa have presents for me?" he'd asked, eyes wide with hope. "I'm sure they will, buddy," I'd answered, though I wasn't certain at all. My parents' gifts to Ethan had always been perfunctory at best. Educational toys or clothes, nothing like the lavish gifts they showered on Madison and Trevor. Christmas morning had started pleasantly enough. We arrived at my parents' colonial-style mansion at 10 a.m. As instructed, the house was decorated impeccably as always. A massive Douglas fir dominated the formal living room, adorned with tasteful gold and silver ornaments. Professionally wrapped presents were piled underneath their coordinating paper and ribbons, a stark contrast to our simply wrapped contributions. Elaine, her husband Bradford, and their children had arrived before us. Madison and Trevor were already on the couch, engrossed in their phones. Elaine air-kissed my cheeks before turning her attention back to Mom, who was showing off a new piece of artwork in the foyer. Bradford gave me a firm handshake and a "good to see you, man," before returning to a conversation with my father about stock options. Ethan hovered near his cousins, waiting for an acknowledgement that never came. Sophia squeezed my hand as we entered the living room. "It'll be over before we know it," she whispered, and I nodded gratefully. Lunch was the usual, carefully orchestrated affair. Catered food served on the good china, with Mom directing the conversation toward Elaine's recent court victory and Bradford's promotion. Sophia and I answered polite questions about our jobs. Though I noticed how my father's eyes glazed over when I mentioned the science fair I'd been organizing at school. It was after lunch, when we had all gathered in the living room for the gift exchange, that the atmosphere shifted. Dad cleared his throat, standing tall in front of the fireplace. At 72, he still had the commanding presence that had intimidated generations of medical residents. "Before we begin with the gifts," he announced, "your mother and I want to say something." Mom nodded, her silver blonde hair perfectly coiffed, not a strand out of place. "We've been reflecting a lot this year about family, about legacy, about what truly matters." I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was going to be one of those heartwarming holiday moments where aging parents realize the importance of family bonds over achievement. Dad continued, "And we've come to an important realization that we want to share with all of you." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Elaine. "Christmas is for those who made us proud." The words hung in the air for a moment before he continued. "We've worked hard all our lives to create opportunities for our children to give them every advantage. And when we see those advantages being put to good use, building something meaningful, continuing the family legacy of excellence, well, that deserves to be celebrated." Mom stepped forward. "We want our gifts this year to reflect our appreciation for how those opportunities have been used." My stomach tightened as I began to understand what was happening. Beside me, Sophia had gone very still. "Elaine Bradford. Kids, these are for you," Dad announced, gesturing to the largest pile of presents under the tree. What followed was an obscene display of extravagance. Elaine unwrapped a designer handbag that I knew cost more than 3 months of my mortgage payments. Bradford received a luxury watch. Madison and Trevor were given the latest gaming systems designer clothes in envelopes that I later learned contained substantial contributions to their already well-funded college accounts. Throughout it all, my parents beamed with pride, taking photos and exclaiming over each gift. Elaine performed surprise and gratitude with practiced precision, though I could see the smug satisfaction in her eyes. Then came our turn. "Daniel, Sophia, and Ethan, we have something for you as well," Mom said, her tone noticeably cooler. Dad handed me a small rectangular package. Inside was a framed family photo from last year's photo shoot, the one Mom had insisted on for their Christmas cards, and a gift card to a mid-range restaurant chain for $100. "We thought you could use a nice dinner out," Mom explained, her smile not reaching her eyes. For Sophia, there was a generic scarf. For Ethan, a set of educational flashcards about human anatomy to help you if you ever decide to follow the family tradition of medicine, Dad told him with a meaningful look. Ethan's face fell as he watched his cousins playing with their new tablets and gaming devices. He clutched the flashcards to his chest and whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa," in the small, polite voice we taught him to use. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, more deliberately engineered to highlight the disparity in how my parents valued their 2 children and their families. Sophia's hand found mine squeezing hard enough to hurt. I knew she was fighting tears, and I silently thanked her for her restraint. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of discomfort. Elaine and Bradford showed no awareness of, or perhaps no concern for, the painful situation. They continued to engage our parents in lively conversation about their recent luxury vacation, while their children flaunted their new possessions. As dusk fell, I made our excuses. "We should get going. Ethan has school tomorrow, and Sophia has an early shift." Mom barely looked up from admiring Madison's new cashmere sweater. "Of course, dear. Drive safely." As we gathered our meager gifts and put on our coats, I noticed Ethan staring at Trevor's new gaming console with undisguised longing. "Why can't we be like them?" he asked quietly, his eyes filling with tears as he looked up at me. That question, asked in my son's innocent voice, broke something in me. Not for myself. I'd long ago accepted my parents' conditional love. But for him, he'd done nothing to deserve this treatment, this blatant message that he was somehow less worthy than his cousins. "We don't want to be like them, buddy," I answered, kneeling to his level. "We're our own kind of family." The words felt hollow, though, as I watched a single tear slide down his cheek. The drive home was silent until we were halfway there. They actually said it out loud. Sophia finally whispered, her voice shaking with anger, "Christmas is for those who made us proud." "Who says that? Who thinks that?" "They've always thought it," I replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "They just finally said it out loud." And posting those pictures, she continued, "While we were still there, I saw your mother uploading them to Facebook before we'd even left. Pictures of Elaine with that ridiculous handbag, the kids with their piles of gifts, and not a single one of us. I hadn't noticed that, but it didn't surprise me. My mother's social media presence was carefully curated to project an image of familial perfection." From the back seat, Ethan's small voice piped up. "Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us?" Sophia twisted in her seat to look at him. "No, sweetheart. They just have a different way of showing love. It doesn't mean they love you any less." The lie hung in the air between us. When we get home, I said quietly to Sophia, I'm going to order him that robot building kit he wanted, the one we thought was too expensive. She nodded. And I'm calling in sick tomorrow. We'll have our own Christmas day, just the three of us. That night, after we put Ethan to bed with promises of a special day tomorrow, I made the mistake of checking Facebook. Sure enough, there was Mom's post. A beautiful family tableau featuring Elaine pulling her designer handbag from the wrapping paper. Madison and Trevor surrounded by expensive gifts, everyone laughing joyously. The caption read, "So blessed to celebrate Christmas with family who make us proud every day. #blessed, #family tradition, #Merry Christmas." Not a single mention of us. Not a single photo showing we had even been there. The comments were already flowing in. Friends and colleagues of my parents gushing over how beautiful Elaine looked, how grown up the grandchildren were. What a perfect family gathering. I shut my laptop with more force than necessary. Don't look at it, Sophia advised from the doorway of our bedroom. It's not worth it. They didn't even acknowledge we were there, I said, my voice hollow. I know she came to sit beside me on the bed, but we know who we are, Dan. We don't need their validation. I nodded, but inside something had shifted. A lifetime of tolerating their behavior, of making excuses, of accepting my place as the lesser child. It all crystallized into something harder, something that felt dangerously close to hatred. This can't happen again, I said firmly. I won't let Ethan grow up thinking he's worth less because I chose to teach instead of becoming a surgeon. So what do we do? Cut them off, Sophia asked. I considered it. Not yet, but things are going to change. The next morning, I called in sick to school for the first time in 5 years. We spent the day as promised creating our own belated Christmas celebration. I'd stayed up late ordering the robot kit with expedited shipping, and Sophia had slipped out early to buy ingredients for a special breakfast and to pick up a few more gifts. Ethan's face when he came downstairs to pancakes shaped like robots and a living room transformed with new decorations was worth every penny and minute of sleep lost. Is it Christmas again? He asked, eyes wide. It's our Christmas, Sophia explained, just for us. As he built his robot with Sophia and me on the floor beside him, reading the instructions and helping him snap pieces together, I made a decision. The hurt and anger of yesterday hadn't dissipated, but I was channeling it now, forming it into determination. I was done being the family doormat. Done accepting scraps of affection and approval. Done exposing my son to their toxic standards. But cutting them off wouldn't be enough. For all their flaws, my parents had resources, connections, money, influence that could benefit Ethan someday. And more importantly, they needed to understand the consequences of their actions. They needed to feel what it was like to be on the outside looking in. The first step was simple. I stopped answering their calls. Not completely. That would have triggered immediate concern and possibly a confrontation. Instead, I became selectively available. I'd answer 1 call in 3, always with an excuse about being busy with work, with Ethan's activities, with life. When we did speak, I was pleasant but distant. I stopped asking about their health, stopped sharing details about our lives, stopped trying to bridge the gap they'd created. The next step was more direct. I began building a case. I set up a separate email account and forwarded myself years of messages from my parents, ones that showed their pattern of favoritism, their dismissive attitude toward my career, their conditional love. I took screenshots of their social media posts, particularly the ones that conspicuously excluded us or highlighted the disparity in how they treated their grandchildren. I spoke with a financial advisor under the guise of planning for Ethan's education. What I really wanted to know was if there was any way to challenge my parents' estate plan, if I was disinherited or given a token amount compared to Elaine. The advisor confirmed what I suspected. In our state, parents had wide latitude to distribute their assets as they saw fit, but there were exceptions for cases of undue influence or diminished capacity. It was a long shot, but I wasn't planning on needing it. This was insurance, not the main strategy. The third step was the most important. I started to succeed on their terms, but for my own reasons. I applied for and received a grant to develop an advanced science curriculum for gifted students. I published an article in a respected educational journal. I took on a leadership role in our district's curriculum development team. None of these achievements matched Elaine's partnership or Bradford's 7-figure bonus, But they were notable enough that word would get back to my parents through their network. And when it did, when they called to tentatively congratulate me, I was busy. I'd call back days later, downplaying my accomplishments, acting as though they weren't worth mentioning. Oh, that it's just a small grant, I'd say. Or the journal article was nothing special. It was petty, perhaps, but it denied them the opportunity to suddenly claim pride in my achievements after years of dismissing my career. 3 months after Christmas, my plan faced its first major test when Mom called to invite us to Elaine's birthday celebration. "It's going to be a lovely garden party at the club," she said. "Ela would be so disappointed if you couldn't make it." A lie, but a convenient one. "I'm afraid we can't," I replied. "Ethan has a science competition that weekend and I'm one of the judges." "Oh," Mom sounded genuinely surprised. "Can't you get someone else to take your place?" "This is family, Daniel. This is important for Ethan's future," I countered, using their own logic against them. "You've always emphasized the importance of education and achievement. I wouldn't want to let him down." The silence on the other end was satisfying. "I suppose I understand," Mom finally said, though her tone suggested the opposite. "We'll miss you." Another lie. After I hung up, Sophia looked at me with a mixture of approval and concern. "There is no science competition that weekend," she noted. "No," I agreed. "But there will be now. I'm organizing one at school." She shook her head, but she was smiling. "You're really committed to this, aren't you?" "They need to understand there are consequences to their behavior," I said. "And Ethan needs to see that we value him and his interests even if they don't." "Just be careful," she warned. "Don't let this consume you." I assured her it wouldn't. But in truth, I was already deep into the next phase of my plan. Over the following months, I continued my campaign of subtle distancing while simultaneously raising my professional profile. I volunteered for committees that would put me in contact with influential people in our community. I cultivated relationships with school board members and local politicians who attended our school functions. I was building a network of my own, one that intersected with my parents' social circle just enough to ensure they would hear about my activities, but always secondhand, never from me directly. When Dad called to mention he'd heard about my little science program from a hospital board member whose grandson was participating, I thanked him for his interest, but changed the subject quickly. "How's your golf game?" I asked, knowing it would distract him. He took the bait launching into a description of his new clubs and improved handicap. I made appropriate noises of interest while mentally checking off another box in my plan. Information asymmetry. I now knew more about what they were hearing about me than they knew about what I was actually doing. Throughout all of this, we maintained minimal contact, a brief call every few weeks, always initiated by them, always ended by me with an excuse about being busy. We declined 2 more family gatherings each time with plausible work-related reasons. I knew they were growing concerned by the increased frequency of their calls, but concern wasn't enough. I needed them to understand what they stood to lose. 6 months after Christmas, the opportunity I'd been waiting for presented itself. Dad called on a Tuesday evening, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Daniel, your mother and I have been talking," he began. "We're concerned that we haven't seen you and your family in quite some time." "We've been busy, Dad," I replied, my tone neutral. "Life doesn't stop for social visits." He cleared his throat. "Yes, well, that's understandable. But we were hoping you might be able to come for dinner this Sunday. Just a small gathering, nothing formal." "Who else will be there?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Just us," he said. "Your mother thought it would be nice to have some time with just you, Sophia, and Ethan." Interesting. No Elaine, no perfect grandchildren. Just us, the family branch they'd so clearly designated as secondary. "Let me check our calendar," I said, though I had already cleared this weekend in anticipation of some sort of outreach. "I'll call you back." I hung up without waiting for his response. Another small assertion of control. Sophia looked up from her book. "Your parents?" I nodded. "They want us to come for dinner on Sunday. Just us, not Elaine's family." "And are we going?" "Yes," I said, "but on our terms." When I called Dad back the next day, I laid out those terms clearly. "We can come on Sunday, but we'll need to leave by 7. Ethan has school the next day, and Sophia has an early shift." "Of course, that's fine," Dad agreed quickly. Too quickly. "And Dad?" I continued. "No discussions about career choices or educational paths. Not for me, not for Ethan." We're not coming to be compared to Elaine's family. There was a pause, then a carefully measured response. I'm not sure what you mean, Daniel. I think you do, I replied evenly. But if you need clarification, we can discuss Christmas. Another longer pause. There's no need for that. We're just looking forward to seeing you all. Then we'll see you Sunday at 4, I concluded and hung up. Sophia, who had been listening, raised an eyebrow. Setting boundaries. Long overdue ones, I confirmed. Sunday arrived, and as we drove to my parents' house, I briefed Sophia and Ethan on the plan. Remember, we're leaving at 7 no matter what, I told Sophia. If they try to steer the conversation toward comparisons or bring up Christmas, we change the subject once. If they persist, we leave. She nodded. And what's the goal here? What do you want from this dinner? It was a fair question. I want them to realize that access to us, to their son and daughter-in-law and grandson, is not a given. It's conditional on their behavior, just like their love has always been conditional on achievement. That sounds like fighting fire with fire, she observed. Sometimes that's the only way to make people understand, I replied. To Ethan, I simply said, be yourself, buddy. You're perfect just as you are. He grinned, revealing the gap where he'd recently lost a tooth. Can I tell Grandpa about my robot? I finished building it. Absolutely, I assured him. That's a great accomplishment. The dinner itself was a study in subtle power dynamics. Mom had prepared all my favorite foods from childhood, a transparent attempt to appeal to nostalgia. Dad was uncharacteristically attentive, asking Ethan about school and his interests with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. They were trying. I had to give them that. But beneath the surface pleasantries, I could sense their confusion and concern. This wasn't how our interactions typically went. Usually, I was the one making an effort, seeking approval, smoothing over awkward moments. Now I was responding rather than initiating, accepting their attention without showing gratitude for it, treating their interest in our lives as expected rather than a gift. The shift was subtle, but profound. When Ethan proudly told them about his robot and the science fair where he demonstrated it, Dad started to say something about how it was a good start, but caught himself when he saw my expression. Instead, he asked to see pictures, which Ethan eagerly showed on my phone. That's very impressive, Mom said with what sounded like genuine approval. You must have worked very hard on it. Ethan beamed. Dad helped me with the hard parts, but I did most of it myself. Your father was always good with his hands, Dad remarked in what might have been the first compliment he'd paid me in years. The conversation continued pleasantly enough through dinner. They asked about Sophia's work at the hospital and for once listened without comparing it unfavorably to Elaine's legal career. As we finished dessert, a homemade apple pie that had been my favorite as a child, Mom broached the subject I've been waiting for. We've missed seeing you all these past few months, she said, her tone carefully casual. You've been so busy. Work has been demanding, I replied neutrally but rewarding. Yes, we've heard through the grapevine that you're doing quite well, Dad added. Richard Blackwell mentioned your science program when we played golf last week. He was quite impressed. Richard Blackwell was the superintendent of our school district and a member of my parents' country club. His approval was exactly the sort of validation they respected. I inclined my head in acknowledgement but didn't elaborate. We were thinking, Mom continued, filling the silence, that perhaps we could plan a family vacation this summer. All of us, you and Sophia and Ethan, Ela and Bradford and the kids. We could rent that beach house on the Cape again. The beach house where 2 years ago Elaine's family had been given the master suite while we'd been assigned the smallest bedroom with a pull-out couch for Ethan. The vacation where every activity had been planned around Madison and Trevor's preferences, where every meal had featured their favorite foods. I don't think that will work for us, I said calmly. We've already made our summer plans. Oh, Mom looked surprised. What are you doing? We're taking Ethan to space camp in Alabama, Sophia answered. He's been fascinated with astronomy lately, and we thought it would be a good experience for him. It was true. We had made these plans, though, not before this invitation. Ethan's interest in space had been growing steadily, nurtured by books we bought him and documentaries we'd watched together. Space camp, Dad repeated, with a slightly dismissive tone I knew. Well, that sounds interesting. It's going to be awesome, Ethan exclaimed, oblivious to the undercurrent. We get to use a simulator and learn about rockets, and maybe I'll be an astronaut someday. Or a rocket engineer, I added, meeting Dad's gaze steadily. Or a science teacher. Whatever makes him happy. The message was clear, and I saw from Dad's expression that he understood it. Mom, ever the diplomat tried again. Well, perhaps we could plan something for the fall then after the school year starts. Perhaps I agreed non-committally. We'll have to see how things look closer to the time. I checked my watch. Speaking of time, we should be heading out soon. Early morning tomorrow. But it's only 6:30, Mom protested. You said 7. Traffic might be heavy, I replied, standing, and Ethan needs time to wind down before bed. They couldn't argue with that without seeming inconsiderate of their grandson's needs. Another deliberate move on my part. As we prepared to leave, Mom disappeared briefly, returning with a gift bag that she handed to Ethan. A little something for you, sweetheart, she said with a warm smile that looked almost genuine. Just because. Ethan pulled out a complex Lego set featuring a space shuttle, exactly the sort of thoughtful gift they'd never bothered with before. Wow! Thank you, Grandma and Grandpa, he exclaimed, his face lighting up. You're very welcome, Dad said, ruffling his hair affectionately. I caught Sophia's eye over Ethan's head. This was new. This attempt to connect with him on his own terms, to acknowledge his interests rather than trying to shape them. It was a start, a small one, but a start nonetheless. At the door, Mom hugged me tightly. Another rarity. Don't be a stranger, Daniel, she whispered. We miss you. For the first time since Christmas, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they were capable of change. But I wasn't ready to relent completely. Not yet. We'll be in touch. I promised, neither committing to nor refusing further contact. As we drove away, Sophia reached over and squeezed my hand. They're trying, she observed. They're afraid of losing access. I corrected her. That's not the same as understanding what they did wrong. Maybe not, she conceded. But it's a beginning. Over the next few weeks, there was a noticeable shift in my parents' behavior. They called more regularly, but respected when I said I was busy. They sent thoughtful cards and small gifts to Ethan, acknowledging his interests rather than trying to redirect them toward medicine. They even commented positively on a public Facebook post Sophia had made about a community health initiative she was involved in at the hospital, the first time they had ever publicly acknowledged her career. I remained cautiously engaged, responding to their overtures without initiating, accepting their attempts at connection without showing excessive gratitude. I was waiting, watching to see if this change was superficial or genuine. The real test came in late July when Mom called to tell me that Elaine and her family would be visiting for a weekend, and they'd love for us to join them for dinner on Saturday. We thought we'd do a casual barbecue in the backyard, she said. Nothing fancy. I hesitated. This would be the first time we'd all be together since Christmas, and I wasn't sure I was ready to see how my parents would navigate having both families present. I'll have to check our schedule, I said. We might have plans. Of course, Mom replied, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice. But we'd really love to see all of you. I discussed it with Sophia that night after Ethan was in bed. What do you think, I asked? Should we go? She considered for a moment. I think we should conditionally. Meaning we go. But at the first sign that they're falling back into old patterns, we leave. No explanations, no arguments. We just pack up and go. I nodded, agreed. And we prepare Ethan for the possibility. Yes, she said, but we also prepare him for the possibility that things might be better this time. I called Mom the next day to accept the invitation, making it clear that we might need to leave early depending on how Ethan was feeling. A built-in excuse if we needed one. That's perfectly fine, she assured me. We're just happy you can come. The Saturday of the barbecue arrived hot and humid, typical for late July. As we pulled into my parents' driveway, I noted that Elaine's luxury SUV was already there. Remember? I murmured to Sophia. First sign of trouble. We're out. First sign, she agreed, squeezing my hand. Ethan was already unbuckling his seatbelt, excited despite my cautious preparation. Do you think Trevor brought his new drone? He said on Instagram. He got one for his birthday. I don't know, buddy, I replied honestly. But remember, we brought your robot to show Grandma and Grandpa, so you have something cool to share too. Mom met us at the door, greeting us with warm hugs. Everyone's out back, she said. Your father's at the grill, and Elaine's family got here about an hour ago. We followed her through the house to the backyard patio where Dad was indeed manning the grill. A novelty apron declaring him grill master tied around his waist. Elaine and Bradford were seated at the outdoor table, drinks in hand, while Madison and Trevor were in the yard. the latter flying what appeared to be a new drone. "Look, Dad! Trevor has a drone," Ethan exclaimed, confirming my suspicion. "I see that," I replied, my guard immediately up. This had all the makings of another comparison opportunity. Dad looked up from the grill and waved. "Daniel, Sophia, glad you could make it." His smile seemed genuine, which was promising. Elaine rose from her seat and approached us, air-kissing my cheeks as usual. "How lovely to see you all," she said, her tone pleasant, but with that undercurrent of superiority I knew well. "It's been ages. We've been busy," I replied simply. "So Mom and Dad have said," she responded with a slight raise of her perfectly shaped eyebrows. "Apparently you're quite the rising star in the educational world." And before I could respond, Ethan had spotted the drone and was running toward Trevor, his robot forgotten in his hands. "Wow, can I see your drone?" he called out. Trevor, to his credit, didn't immediately dismiss his younger cousin. "Sure, but don't touch the controls, it's expensive." I tensed, waiting for the inevitable moment when Ethan's less expensive toy would be compared unfavorably to Trevor's high-end gadget. But then something unexpected happened. "What's that you've got?" Trevor asked, nodding at the robot in Ethan's hands. "It's a robot I built," Ethan announced proudly. "It can follow lines and avoid obstacles and everything." Trevor looked genuinely interested. "That's pretty cool." "Did you program it yourself?" "Dad helped me," Ethan admitted. "But I built most of it." "Can it do anything else?" Madison asked, joining the conversation. I watched in amazement as Ethan demonstrated his robot's features to his cousins, who appeared to be genuinely impressed. No dismissive comments, no showing off their own superior possessions, just three kids sharing interests. "They're getting along well," Mom observed, coming to stand beside me with a glass of iced tea. Surprisingly, I agreed cautiously. "We had a talk with Madison and Trevor about being kinder to Ethan," she said quietly, "about how family is about more than competition or showing off." I glanced at her, surprised. "That's good." She met my gaze directly. "We've had a lot of talks over the past few months, your father and I, about family, about what really matters." "Oh." I kept my tone neutral, though my heart rate had picked up. "Yes." She took a sip of her tea. "We realize we've made some mistakes." It was the closest thing to an admission of wrongdoing I'd ever heard from my mother. "Christmas," I said, naming the elephant in the room. She winced visibly. "Yes, Christmas was. It was inexcusable, Daniel. What we did, what we said, the way we treated you and your family." She looked away for a moment. "We were cruel, and we were wrong," she finished quietly. The words hung between us like something fragile, something that might break if either of us moved too quickly. I wasn't prepared for them, not from her, not in this lifetime. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. Mom drew a slow, shaky breath. We genuinely believed we were encouraging excellence, preparing you, shaping you. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that we already had children worthy of pride. We were too focused on what you weren't instead of who you are." I stared at her, searching her expression for insincerity, for manipulation, for the same emotional sleight of hand they'd used my whole life. But I didn't find it. She wasn't deflecting. She wasn't justifying. She looked ashamed. "Your father," she continued, lowering her voice, "has been having trouble sleeping. He keeps replaying that Christmas morning. He keeps asking why we didn't see what we were doing. Why didn't we see how small you must have felt?" Her voice cracked slightly. "How small we made Ethan feel." At that, the tension in my chest loosened just a bit. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked softly. "Because we didn't realize how far we were pushing you away until you stopped chasing us," she replied. "And we shouldn't have needed to lose access to you, to understand what we were losing." She squeezed my arm gently. "We love you, Daniel, and we want the chance to do better. Not just for Ethan, not just for Sophia, but for you." I looked past her toward the yard. Ethan was laughing, genuinely laughing, as Trevor guided the drone to hover just above his robot. The three kids were gathered around it like some kind of joint engineering team, cheering each time the robot dodged the drone's shadow. Dad was watching them too, and he wasn't evaluating or judging or ranking. He was smiling proud in a way that wasn't hierarchical or conditional. Maybe it was the first time I'd ever seen that expression directed at something my son was doing. Maybe it was the first time I'd ever seen it at all.